I didn't shout. I didn't even drop my bags. I just stood at the bottom of those porch steps in the freezing rain, watching my wife sleep on a doormat in a torn cardigan, while my son-in-law stepped over her like she was a stain on the welcome mat he hadn't gotten around to cleaning. My name doesn't matter to most people in this story, because almost none of them ever bothered to ask. For 38 years, I drove long-haul routes out of a depot outside Hamilton, Ontario, hauling freight across the 401 corridor in every kind of weather this country can throw at a man. My hands are cracked from cold steering wheels and diesel fumes. I wear the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation. My neighbors think I'm just an old retired trucker living off a modest pension in a paid-off bungalow. What they don't know is that 14 years ago, I bought into a small fleet leasing company with my severance and my savings. And through some luck and a lot of stubbornness, that company grew into something that now manages logistics contracts across 3 provinces. I sold my controlling stake 18 months ago for a number that would make my old dispatcher faint. I never told anyone outside my lawyer and my wife, not because I'm ashamed I had money, because I wanted to know before I died who in my life loved me and who loved what I could give them. My wife, Eleanor, is the only person who has ever known the full truth. 43 years married, and she never once asked for anything more than her garden, her church choir, and Sunday dinners with the family. She is gentle in a way that some people mistake for weakness. Our daughter, Priya, was raised to be sharper than that. I don't know exactly where the sharpness curdled into something else, but I think it started the day she married Tobias. Tobias was charming the way ice is charming, smooth, cold, and you don't realize how dangerous it is until you're already down. He came from a family with a name but not much money left behind it, and from the first dinner I had with him, I watched him do the math on us. Not love, math. When Priya and Tobias got engaged, Eleanor and I decided to help the way parents do. I put a property in Oakville into a numbered company. Nothing flashy on paper, just a respectable 4-bedroom on a quiet street with a detached garage, and let them live there without a mortgage hanging over their heads. I called in a favor with an old client and got Tobias an interview at a mid-sized investment firm downtown. He thinks to this day he earned that job on merit alone. Maybe he did once he was in the room. I just made sure he got into the room. All we asked in return when Eleanor needed hip surgery and I had to fly out west for 2 months to close out the final pieces of the sale was that they look after her, make sure she ate, make sure she rested, drive her to her physio appointments twice a week. It did not seem like much to ask of 2 people living rent-free in a house I owned. I called Eleanor most evenings those 2 months. Her voice always sounded tired, but I told myself that was the recovery, the medication, the long Canadian winter pressing down on all of us. Looking back now, I understand the difference between a voice that's tired and a voice that's being careful. I didn't know it then. I was 3,000 kilometers away in a Calgary boardroom, signing papers, while my wife was learning how small she could make herself in her own daughter's house. I flew back into Pearson on a Tuesday night in late November, 2 weeks earlier than planned. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to surprise her, walk in, see her face light up, maybe bring home that ridiculous bouquet of grocery store tulips she always pretends not to love. I took a cab straight from the airport instead of waiting for the train. The rain that night was the kind that gets into your bones, sleeting sideways off Lake Ontario, and by the time the cab pulled up outside the Oakville house, the porch light was the only warm thing on the whole street. There were cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. Tobias's colleagues, it turned out later. Some small dinner party Priya was hosting to impress his managing director. Through the bay window, I could see the dining room glowing gold, candles, wine glasses catching the light. And on the front porch in that sleet, curled up on the doormat in a thin gray cardigan with a hole at the elbow, was my wife. I stood frozen at the bottom of the steps for what felt like an hour but was probably 10 seconds. Then the front door opened and Tobias stepped out laughing at something one of his guests said, a glass of red wine still in his hand, his polished shoes catching the porch light. He saw Eleanor curled there and didn't even break stride. He wiped the mud off the sole of his shoe against her shoulder, the way you'd scrape something off a boot mat, and called back over his shoulder to his guests. Don't mind her, that's just our maid, she's a bit eccentric. Laughter. Actual laughter from inside my daughter's house, while my wife of 43 years lay shivering on the front step like something to be stepped around. I did not scream. I did not throw a punch, though God knows my hands wanted to. I climbed those 3 steps slowly, my coat soaked through, and I knelt down and put my hand on Eleanor's shoulder. She flinched first, then opened her eyes, and when she saw it was me, she didn't cry with relief the way I expected. She looked afraid. Afraid of what would happen to her once the dinner party was over, and the guests were gone and it was just her and Tobias and Priya again. That fear told me more than any conversation could have. Tobias finally registered who was kneeling on his porch, and the wine glass nearly slipped from his hand. Who the hell? He started, And then the recognition hit him and his face did the thing faces do when a person realizes they've been caught doing something they thought no one would ever see. Sir, this isn't. She likes to sit out here. She says the cold helps her hip. We were just, get her a blanket, I said. Quiet, quieter than I'd ever spoken to him in 8 years of forced family dinners. Now, he scrambled. People scramble fast when the floor under their lie has just cracked. Inside, while his guests made their awkward, hurried exits, I carried Eleanor to the den and wrapped her in the throw blanket off the back of the couch. A blanket, I noticed, that had clearly never been used for her. Her hands were freezing. Her wedding ring, the one I'd saved 8 months of trucking wages for back in 1983, was gone from her finger. When I asked her where it was, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Priya said it was for safekeeping, she whispered. After I dropped it doing dishes, she said she'd hold on to it so I wouldn't lose it again. I'd find out later that safekeeping meant a pawn shop in Burlington, and that the money had gone toward a handbag Priya had been eyeing for months. Over the next several days, with Eleanor finally safe in our own house and seen by our own doctor, the whole shape of those 2 months came into focus piece by piece in the careful, ashamed way she told it. How Priya had started treating her like hired help almost from the moment I left, handing her grocery lists, expecting meals on a schedule, criticizing how she folded towels, how the physio appointment stopped after the 3rd week because Tobias's schedule got busy and nobody arranged a ride. How Eleanor had started sleeping with a space heater in the guest cottage because the thermostat in the main house was for the family, not the help. How 2 nights before I came home, when Eleanor knocked on the door during the dinner party because she felt dizzy and needed her blood pressure medication from the kitchen, Priya had told her, in front of strangers, to wait outside because she was embarrassing her in front of Tobias's boss. My own daughter said that, about her own mother. I want to tell you I felt rage in that moment, hearing it laid out plain. I did. But underneath the rage was something colder and steadier, the same feeling I used to get driving through a whiteout on the 401. Not panic, just absolute clarity about what needed to happen next, one careful decision at a time. I didn't call Priya screaming. I didn't show up at her door. I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor had actually recommended years ago, and I asked her to quietly start the paperwork. The Oakville house, still owned by my numbered company, was put up for sale within the month. Priya and Tobias found out when a real estate agent's lockbox appeared on their own front door. The connection that got Tobias his investment firm position was never going to unhappen. But the next 2 promotions he'd been counting on, the ones built on quiet recommendations from people who owed me favors, simply stopped materializing. Nobody fired him. Nobody had to. Doors just stopped opening the way they used to. The credit card I'd quietly kept active for household emergencies at the Oakville house was canceled the same week. Priya called me 11 times in 4 days once she understood what was happening. I let most of them go to voicemail. When I finally answered, her voice had none of the coldness I'd heard about secondhand. It cracked immediately, the way a voice does when someone realizes the floor they've been standing on their whole life was never actually theirs. Dad, please. It was a misunderstanding. Mom's exaggerating, you know how she gets. I watched him wipe his shoe on her shoulder, Priya. I was standing right there. Silence on the line, a long one. I told her the truth then, the one I'd kept from her for 14 years, about the company, about the sale, about the fact that the comfortable life she and Tobias had been quietly building for 8 years was a gift, not an inheritance. And gifts can be taken back when the people receiving them forget there was ever a giver behind them. I told her I wasn't cutting her off forever. I'm not a man who believes in burning bridges down to the waterline, not even now. But I told her exactly what it would take to even begin rebuilding anything, starting with an apology to her mother that didn't have a single but in it, and a long, hard look at the man she'd chosen to defend over the woman who raised her. She didn't have the apology ready that week, or the next. There's a particular kind of silence that follows when someone realizes they've been measured and found wanting, and Priya disappeared into hers for nearly 2 months. Eleanor healed slowly, the way bodies do at our age, but she healed. She got her ring back. I bought it back from that Burlington pawn shop myself, paid in cash, didn't even haggle, just wanted it on her hand again. She started sleeping through the night without the space heater memory waking her. Some mornings I'd catch her standing at our own kitchen window, just looking out at our own modest backyard, like she was relearning what it felt like to be somewhere she actually belonged. It was Eleanor, not me, who eventually opened the door back up. 3 months in, she asked Priya to come for tea, alone, no Tobias. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, and I never asked for every detail, because some things belong only to a mother and a daughter. What I do know is that Priya came home from that visit, sat in our driveway for 20 minutes before coming inside. And when she finally walked through our door, her eyes were red and her voice, when she spoke to her mother, didn't have a single trace of the old performance in it. Tobias and Priya separated 5 months after that November night. I won't pretend I felt sorry about it. Some marriages are built on a foundation, and some are built on what one person thinks they can extract from the other person's family. And once the extracting stops, there's not always much structure left standing. These days, Eleanor's back in her garden every weekend the weather allows, gloves on, humming something off-key from the choir hymnal. Priya visits most Sundays now, and she's the one who pulls the chair out for her mother at the table before anyone else thinks to. It took losing nearly everything she thought she had for her to remember what she actually had all along. I still wear the same flannel shirts. I still let the neighbors think I'm just an old man with a good pension and too much time on his hands. There's a peace in that I never expected to find, being underestimated by people who don't matter, and finally fully seen by the two who do. I came up those porch steps that night not knowing what I'd find, and what I found broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully mend. But it also showed me, with a clarity I'd spent 43 years almost too comfortable to need, exactly who in this family was worth protecting, and exactly what I was still willing to do to protect her.